welcome everybody to the Pact Act Town Hall with Representative Slotkin. My name is Patrick Forstek. I'm going to be sort of, I guess emceeing is the correct term for this. I've got all the questions and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions later. I am the director for the Student Veterans Resource Center here at Michigan State, and I have the honor of helping out today. It's a great opportunity. In my role over there, I work with all the student veterans and military-connected students in general. We have about, 2,200 total, 400 or 500-ish vets, and a whole lot of dependents. So we serve the dependent community pretty significantly here. Our office, a little bit about what I do. So I always laugh when I get to tell people what I do because it's tricky. I basically just walk veterans and their dependents and other military-connected students to all kinds of resources, supporting them, in their academic endeavors and other, issues they may have, connect them to community, state, federal resources. So again, I'm going to be learning a lot today along with you, and I will go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce the two speakers today, and they're going to have some remarks, and then we'll have some questions I have that some of you may have sent in ahead of time, and then you have the opportunity to ask questions after that. So first off, Representative Slotkin, Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin is in her third term in Congress and currently represents Michigan's 7th Congressional District, which includes Ingham, Livingston, Clinton, and Shiawassee counties, as well as parts of Eaton, Genesee, and Oakland counties. The Congresswoman has spent her career in national service after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which took place during her first week of graduate school in New York City. Representative Slotkin was recruited by the CIA to be a Middle East analyst and went on to devote her career to protecting the United States from national security threats. In her role at the CIA, Representative Slotkin worked alongside the U.S. military during 3 tours in Iraq as a militia expert. In between her tours in Iraq, she held various defense and intelligence positions under President Bush and President Obama, including roles at the White House and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. In 2011, Representative Slotkin took a senior position at the Pentagon, and until January 2017, she served as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. A third-generation Michigander, Representative Slotkin spent much of her early life on her family farm in Holly, Michigan, and she currently serves on the House Agricultural Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, and co-chairs the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus. She is also a member of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. And then John Borsler. John Borsler serves as the Chief Veteran Experience Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs. In that capacity, he leads the Veterans Experience Office, the Secretary's Customer Experience Insight Engine, supporting and enabling the department in providing the highest quality experiences in the delivery of care, benefits, and memorial services to service members, veterans and their families, caregivers, and survivors. John also provides executive oversight of the VEO's many innovative projects and programs, working collaboratively, it's been a long week, working collaboratively with VA's leadership to help achieve greater access, outcomes, and experiences for all VA customers. John has a distinguished career as a leader in the veteran services field as a recipient of both the Eisenhower and Marshall Memorial Fellowships, having traveled to the UK, France, Denmark, Israel, Bosnia, Hungary, and Ukraine to write comparative papers on their military transition systems. As the first Marshall Prize recipient, John recently completed a 3-year project in Ukraine to assist in the development of their Ministry of Veterans Affairs, the first of its kind in Europe. John is a native Texan who served honorably in the U.S. Marine Corps from 1999 to 2007 as a non-commissioned officer and infantry unit leader, including 1 combat tour in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom from 04 to 05, Operation Natural Fire in the Republic of Kenya in 2006. John has also served as the executive director of Next Stop, a program manager with Wounded Warrior Project, the mayor of Houston's Office of Veterans Affairs, and is a policy and district staffer for a U.S. representative. In 2009, John helped found the Lone Star Veterans Association, which became the largest network of post-9/11 veterans in Texas and successfully merged with Combined Arms in March of 2019. Join me in welcoming them.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Wonderful to have you here today to talk about the Pact Act, our sort of most recent and significant piece of veterans legislation. I want to thank John for joining us. He's been doing these town halls across the United States trying to explain to people how the process works. And he's been great, and he's brought a bunch of veteran advocates with him to help with individual cases if anyone has specific casework that they want to flag here today. I also want to recognize a few key members of my staff. My office here in Lansing, over by the Capitol, is designed to help people with casework, particularly with any problems you're having with the federal government. So of course, Social Security Administration, immigration, those kinds of things. But we also have a ton of VA casework that we do. And Gina Shireman, Gina, raise your hand, is our Director of Constituent Services. She is our lead caseworker on VA issues. Alex Hawkins is also here. Where's Alex? Over there. He's what used to be called our Wounded Warrior Fellow. It's now called the Green and Gold Congressional Aid Program. He is an EOD officer in the Army National Guard here in Michigan, just returned from orders after spending 3 months in Virginia, and he does veteran outreach across the district. And then some of you may know Chan Wakefield. He's our military and veterans liaison. He's in the Navy reserves, and he is currently out on orders, and that's why we don't see him here today. So if you need help with the VA, please come and see one of those folks or the folks at the back of the room. You know, I wanted to give a little bit of history of where this bill came from before we go over to the details and how it's being implemented, just so you understand. When I got elected in this area and started in 2019, one of the first things that I voted on, which seemed crazy to me, was making sure that some of our Blue Water Navy veterans from Vietnam got coverage for Agent Orange exposure. Now, if you think about it, 2019 compared to when the Vietnam War actually took place, you're talking about an astonishing amount of time to make sure that veterans from that war got the care that they needed. And I want to say that the issues we're talking about today, particularly related to burn pits in the Pact Act, are directly connected to the negative experience we had getting people care from Vietnam and Agent Orange. And I want to thank those veterans who fought that hard fight, because we are here today talking about 9/11 era veterans, for the most part, because of that Agent Orange fight. So yeah, we can clap for them. So back in 2019, we started to get outreach from veterans groups who were saying that there are some weird medical conditions that are popping up, particularly in those who served in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Somalia, a few other places. We need to look heavily at covering those veterans when they come home. And as someone who served as a CIA officer alongside the military and lived next to one of these burn pits, I watched as the CIA changed their medical protocols because of the way we were exposed to that nonstop 24/7 burning of all of our trash in a combat zone. And anyone who's been around one of these things, it is not like we're sorting paper from aluminum, from jet fuel, from plastic. It is everything and anything gets thrown in that burn pit because there's no, garbage pickup in Baghdad or in Kabul. So many of us lived alongside those things, and we started, even in theater, right, having weird esophageal issues, eye issues, just a whole bunch of things just from living in those conditions. So it made complete sense to me that the 9/11 generation in particular, when they came home, and they're 5, 10, 15 years after their service, they're starting to see a whole series of conditions connected to their service. And that language is important. We started to also hear a lot from the folks who worked tirelessly to get health care for the 9/11 first responders and firefighters, who also, in a very similar way, worked for months to put out the fires at Ground Zero and inhaled all those toxic fumes, all that burning stuff that was coming out of the biggest attack on American soil, right? Those advocates, a lot of them firefighters themselves, made the point that we're starting to see the same issues with a bunch of our younger veterans who were exposed to burn pits. And I want to thank the firefighter community because they were on the front end of this. We also had famous people like Jon Stewart, who took up this issue because he had been a big person to support the 9/11 firefighters. So he then just transitioned his energy to this issue and getting veterans the care that they need. He would literally show up in Congress, you know, with a camera and just stalk the halls of Congress for anyone who wasn't supporting this bill. And that brought a lot of good attention to this bill, which I think is part of the reason it got passed. So we know that from this burn pit exposure, there's been a set of 23 conditions identified that are directly connected to that exposure, to serving in those war zones. So I helped co-author a bill that would go at this issue directly by saying if you served in one of these combat zones as an American, in the American military, active duty or reserve, and you just by nature of being in a combat zone, you were near a burn pit. So that means Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, but Syria, Somalia, a handful of other places where just by being there, you lived near a burn pit. So we came up with a piece of legislation, got a bunch of bipartisan support, and I want to emphasize how important it is that veterans legislation be bipartisan, always, always, always. It should not be a political issue. And we were able to get this piece of legislation and others passed in what's called the Pact Act last August. It was signed into law. It was not easy, it came down to the wire, and of course, at the end of the day, what was a big holdup? Because supporting veterans, in theory, is fine, because it's mom and apple pie, but it was money, right? It costs money to bring in a bunch of new veterans into the VA Healthcare Center, and we believe that something between 2 and potentially as high as 5 million veterans who currently don't get care from the VA will now qualify for care from the VA. So what I wanted to do, I know a number of you, especially from the VSO community, have already been advising folks on how to get appointments and get intake. If your case has been rejected already, how to go back and ask for a review now that the Pact Act has passed. We're going to hear some details so that people know what they qualify for and what that they have access to. But I just want to thank everyone in the audience for your advocacy. This kind of stuff does not happen if we weren't hearing from the grassroots, if we're not hearing from people that this stuff is going on and needs to be addressed. Lastly, I'll just say if you're following the news, that you may have caught wind of a conversation about the debt ceiling, the debt limit, and a debate that's going on right now in Washington. And what we are watching very closely is what will happen, if anything, to veterans' care in this debate. There is already a bill that has passed through the House that would do some significant damage to the VA. And when I mean significant, I mean significant. If the cuts that are currently on the table went through, we'd see upwards of 80,000 VA employees cut. 34,000 cases added to the backlog. I mean, just stuff that cannot happen. I don't think we're going to go over that cliff, but I just wanted to address it because it is kind of on a bunch of news channels right now as we talk about these things. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for caring about veterans issues, whether you served yourself, you're a spouse, you're a family member, or you just care about this issue because you care about our country. Thank you for that. And with that, I'll hand it over to the experts, and then we'll take your questions.
Howdy. Thanks so much, Congresswoman, for hosting me. It's great to be in the great state of Michigan. I just came down from Traverse City, where the Michigan Department of Veterans Affairs hosted a leadership summit. It's beautiful up there. That's something that y'all been hiding from the rest of us in the country, so I'm happy to come back anytime. But it's just great to be here with all of you. As he mentioned in his opening remarks, Patrick talked a little bit about what we do at the Veterans Experience Office, but if any of y'all have gotten a survey from VA asking about your experience, that's from us. We really do appreciate y'all giving us that feedback because we follow up on it and we do improve the process and we do improve the experience and use those insights to do so. We also run 1-800-MY-VA-411, so that's kind of the single telephonic front door for VA. So if you have any questions at all relating to your benefits, care, memorial services, vet centers, call 1-800-MyVA411 and we'll get you to the right part of VA. We also help kind of make VA.gov, our digital front door, more useful to access for veterans and their families. But we appreciate feedback on that experience as well. And finally, one of the coolest programs we get to run are what we call Veteran Experience Action Centers. And we recently hosted one in Michigan about 3 weeks ago. And we served 331 veterans that essentially will come in for a 3-day kind of concierge enrollment sprint. So whether you need help enrolling in the Veterans Health Administration or filing your benefits claims, it's a fantastic experience. Over 90% of the folks that attended it would recommend it to other veterans. So we'll be back again next year to do that. And if any of y'all need more information, I'd be happy to provide it. In that process, when we're registering for the 331 veterans that we serve in the Michigan Veteran Experience Action Center, we identified 48 individuals who are at risk of being homeless. And we immediately connect them with the VA Medical Center in Battle Creek or Ann Arbor, depending on where they live, so that they can get triaged and care immediately. So a couple things about the Pact Act and toxic exposure, the way that we're implementing it, as Congresswoman Slotkin mentioned a second ago. I'm a veteran. As a combat veteran, I use VA for all of my care. Last summer, when sinusitis, rhinitis, and asthma became the first 3 of the new 23 presumptive conditions, I submitted my claim online at va.gov. And a couple of weeks later, I had an appointment with my with a compensation and pension exam. Really great experience in talking about the burn pits that I was exposed to, the sandstorms that I had been exposed to while in Iraq and in East Africa. And within the next couple of months, I got my rating back, and now I'm able to be seen by VA for the rest of my days for those conditions, especially, which is useful for me because I have bad sinusitis, and so I get allergy medications and nasal sprays, etc. So I've been through the toxic exposure screening process as well. We're going to talk a little bit about that. 5 minutes, talk to your, it's in the normal routine of your care, or you can go and ask for a screening if you're not in VHA care from the Veterans Health Administration care yet. Super easy. Talk to the provider about where you were deployed to, what you were exposed to, what your symptoms are, and because they're presumptive conditions, we don't have to necessarily prove that you had to go through the normal process. If we can identify your deployment location and date that meets the qualifications of those 23 presumptive conditions, and you have those symptoms, then we'll grant that. So we have our partners from the Veterans Benefits Administration here with the Detroit Regional Office in the back. So thank y'all so much for being here. So if y'all have specific questions about your claims or any other benefits programs, including education services with the great universities next door. We also have the Veterans Health Administration, the Battle Creek VA Medical Center here. We have the vet centers and the mobile vet center, as y'all might have seen outside. So please visit our folks today and talk with them about your care and benefits. Finally, I just wanted to talk briefly about how many folks we've served so far since this incredible piece of legislation passed last year and President Biden signed it into law on August 10th of 2022. We've screened over 3 million veterans for toxic exposures, and we're continuing to screen more. Over 200,000 claims have been completed. Over 500,000 claims have been submitted for Pact and Pact-related issues and toxic exposures. About 70,000 new veterans have enrolled in the Veterans Health Administration as a result, and we're hiring thousands of people to work on the benefit side and on the healthcare side to make sure we're delivering the largest expansion of care and benefits in VA's history. The last thing I'll mention is we have a deadline coming up on August 9th. Essentially, if you need to file your claim before then, because whenever your claim is granted, it will be backdated to August 10th of 2022, but you have to file before August 9th of this year. If you go to a veteran service organization and they're not able to help you file your claim because they're so busy, then ask them to file an intent to file form, which our friends can help you better understand with that, but they can also help you file your claim, so don't pass them up on that. That'll give you a full year to file your claims, but it'll meet that deadline. So that's critical information for you all to pass on to your fellow veterans and families so that they can get the benefits and care that they have so rightly earned. Thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm really excited to answer some questions with Congresswoman Slotkin, and thanks for having me in Michigan. Cheers.
Fancy microphone away. All right, I have a handful of questions here that we're going to go through. But also Marine combat veteran myself, and I went through that process last year. And the one thing I always tell students is just make sure you get that intent to file in. It makes a huge difference. All right, are we ready for questions? All right, question 1. How can I find, I feel like I'm standing close to that. How can I find out if the cancer I have was from my military service?
The easiest way, I would recommend immediately going and talking to your care providers, going through that toxic exposure screening process, and filing a claim. Because what we will be able to, if your symptoms are aligned to the 23 presumptive conditions, which can be found online at va.gov/pact, I believe we also have information on the 23 presumptive conditions, which include those cancers that qualify. But file your claim, we will be able to tie your deployment location and your service locations that may grant that presumptive condition.
Thank you. All right, question 2. Are human waste burning fumes exposure covered? Yeah.
Got a green light or red
I
light?
got a green light.
Do you?
Kind of flashing blue.
Should be working.
Thank you. Thank you for handing me the poop question. And I'm not sure that this is in a Congresswoman's normal span of information, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the major things we were burning in those burn pits was human waste, right? I think folks remember, if you've served in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a whole range of what the facilities looked like. But we were burning that waste because we're on someone else's soil and we don't have proper sewer systems wherever we were set up. So my understanding is that is certainly part of the conversation. And just for what it's, just as for a little color for those of you who maybe weren't in these war zones, by the time as a CIA officer I was leaving Baghdad, we were testing for an eye disease or an eye infection that was basically a fecal infection in the eye, right? So the content of fecal matter in those burn pits was high because we were finding it in the wrong places. But let me know if
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Congresswoman, your service in those areas as a CIA officer, I thought in your exposure to those toxins as well, naturally that is one of the many items that we burned, including munitions, including plastic bottles, including other dangerous chemicals. So absolutely, burn pits. This human waste is a big part of that, and I know that with both of our experience, I thought we could both contribute to that. So.
All right. Question 3. Is there a length of time of service, dates, or location of deployment restrictions?
Yeah, when we were crafting the legislation, we debated, how do you decide that someone can claim a connection to service with this toxic exposure? And we toyed and played around with, is it that you had to live within a certain number of feet of a burn pit, right? That's where you slept. Well, that didn't work because maybe you served all day long next to a burn pit and went and slept somewhere else. Well, maybe we were thinking it was the number of time you spent on deployment. So if you did 2 years total, maybe then you qualified. Well, that didn't work because you could be living right next to a burn pit for 6 months and have the same amount of toxic exposure as someone who serves for 5 years in a war zone. So what we ended up doing was doing it by geography. It was just based on where you served, and then I think it's 6 months. Is that correct? That you have to have a minimum of 6 months in the, or no?
I think it could be less than that, because some folks that get injured or wounded may go home
Correct, you're right.
before that.
You're right. So there is a list of places, and unsurprisingly, these are places where we had a rather austere environment, where you were setting up camp and you had to be self-contained. You weren't living in Germany. You weren't living in Romania. You weren't living in a place that had sewer and water and trash pickup. So I think we did it in a way that is the most expansive as possible. And you don't have to prove, right? You therefore don't have to come with all your papers and say, look how many feet I live. No one remembers how far they live from a burn pit. So now it's just where you served and demonstrating that, which is available on your record.
And the deployment location, there are specific deployment locations now you can find on va.gov/pact, or you can find more information with our partners back here. But we are going to be expanding that based on the research. So what we would encourage you to do is go and get your toxic exposure screening, file your claim. That helps contribute to the body of research that could open up new presumptive conditions based on your deployment location and what you were exposed to.
Thank you. All right, question 4. Is there additional compensation for burn causation for respiratory illness?
Besides coverage, do you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah. The additional I mean, it's going to be whatever your claim is rated at based on your the severity of your symptoms and correlated to your deployment location. That's what you're going to be rated at, and that, of course, that condition can worsen over time. So making sure that you're staying up to date with not only the Veterans Benefits Administration, but with your healthcare provider at VA, and talking about the expansion of those conditions over time and how it may affect your life.
I think that is a point worth foot stomping, is that you may find yourself having a mild case of asthma as a maybe younger veteran who served in Iraq or Afghanistan, but you just don't know what that could turn into. And one of the 23 things that are listed, any respiratory cancer, right? Or a neck cancer, pancreatic cancer, all these things that we hope people never get. But we just don't know in life. And so even if you have just a sinusitis or asthma, something that's non-fatal, that's chronic, people should go in because you don't know what that's going to turn into over time.
Thank you. Question 5. Can you discuss the quote other as it relates to presumptive?
That would be what I referred to a second ago. A lot of the new evidence that we're gathering through the research process is delivered by veterans who were exposed to different toxins that aren't currently listed as a presumptive condition. And now that VA has the authority granted to it by the Pact Act, the passage of the Pact Act, we will be investigating and then awarding new presumptive conditions tied to different toxic exposures and deployment locations.
And by the way, this is the opposite process as Agent Orange. Agent Orange, they required so much research, generation of studies, a generation of studies that are happening in our academic institutions to prove that what people were experiencing from Vietnam was actually connected to Agent Orange. So we waited and waited and waited, and me in 2019 still voting on Agent Orange issues for a war that ended 30 years before. We reversed the paradigm with toxic exposure, particularly from burn pits, where we started seeing conditions pop up. And yes, we can study them for the next 25, 40 years, and then you don't give anyone care. So we reversed the paradigm. We listed the 23 we can now connect, but then we leave it open so that if suddenly we figure out that some ear infection is deeply connected to a burn pit, that if that pops up in the VA system, they're able to automatically add that to the list of 23 conditions.
Thank you. Question 6. Concerned about 1, slow processing of claims due to limited staffing nationally, and 2, future VA funding.
Absolutely. So we have hired thousands of new experts and trained new experts to handle claims in the Detroit regional office. Our team back in the back can attest to this. We're seeing record numbers of veterans applying for benefits, but we're also having our highest production year ever. And that's because of the additional hiring and the additional resources that VA has been given to bring these experts on. We recently had our first 9,000 claim day, which in VA's history, which is incredible, and that's due to the incredible work of our benefit specialists like our partners here at the Detroit Regional Office. So I want to say thank you all for what you do every day and your colleagues across the country.
But look, I mean, that's, especially if there's folks from the Vet Center at Livingston County, we've talked about this before, the importance of getting in that claim by August 9th, even though things are, we always want things to move faster, is paramount. And we should not let any veteran that we know do what often happens, which is like, I know I'm going to have to wait, I know it's going to be a problem, I know it's going to be a process, so I'm not going to do it and take the time. You need to kick them in the butt to do it before August 9th to make sure they get in the system. Oh, and future funding. So, you know, when we originally did the Pact Act, there were folks who were worried about the price tag, because it's expensive to give another 2 to 5 million veterans health care. There were people who were concerned about that price, and they wanted the VA to take that money at a hide. They said, okay, if you want to cover another group of people, fine. You find the cost savings in current veteran benefits. And we just couldn't do that. There's no way. Then you just start gutting other programs that are also important. So we were able to carve out a special fund for the Pact Act. It's funded separately and in addition to the normal baseline VA budget. And what we've been doing is fight to defend that special fund, right? Yeah, we can clap for that, sure. And that is what we continue to do. Now, I think it's fair to say that the VA was not surprised, but we definitely raised eyebrows at the number of veterans who came forward to file those claims. I mean, like you said, that's a lot of people, 3 million people since August. We're not even a year through that. And that means, by the way, there's a huge demand and a huge need for that care and for those service for those veterans. But the VA has certainly said that the price tag, the amount that we gave them, which I think was $5 billion, was not enough, and that they were going to need more money than what we gave them. So, like everything, we're going to have to debate that. But at a minimum, right now, we are fighting to maintain the separate and special funding portfolio or account for the Pact Act.
And even though and I didn't mention this a second ago, we're 13% higher than we were this time last year in terms of our claims productivity, and obviously the toxic exposure screening, those 3 million the Congresswoman mentioned, that is phenomenal productivity, but we continue to see a higher demand, and we will over the next several years of veterans that need to access these expanded care and benefits.
Awesome, thank you. The next question. To date, I have been unable to get my in-service health records from St. Louis. How can I apply for benefits without the records?
That you do just that. You apply for benefits, and our teammates at the Veterans Benefits Administration will be able to locate your military records and then correlate your deployment locations and your symptoms based on the exam and based on the routine of care that you have with the Veterans Health Administration.
And if you continue to not be able to get your records, that's when, I don't know if this person has called my office, but that is a GINA specialty over there. We basically bang pots and pans with different federal offices until they give us things. So please find Gina. She's good at banging pots and pans.
All right, next one. Will the Pact Act expand exposures for burn pits to Vietnam veterans?
I think that once again goes back to the research. We know that there were burn pits in different parts of the other conflict zones and other areas, and not just including Vietnam, but Cambodia and Laos. But we're waiting for a lot of the research to be connected to the deployment location, to be connected to the symptoms, and so that will be continued to be considered along with many other different presumptive conditions over the next several years.
Question 9. How can a dependent be helped beyond what the law currently says because we are impacted as well.
I mean, I will just say, this is a general comment, and then I'll hand it over on spouse issues. So I have heard a ton over the last 4 years about what happens when, particularly with Vietnam era folks, when the veteran passes away and the spouse is left holding the bag, having to care for herself, maybe the rest of the family, some of the loss of income that happens. And I think the thing that we are certainly exploring from a legislative perspective is how do we make sure that even when the veteran themselves passes away, that the dependent spouse continues to get the care that they need. And while I don't know, and I'll turn it over on the specifics of the Pact Act for the spouse of someone who's been exposed to a burn pit, certainly your spouse getting coverage is an important thing, or the veteran getting coverage is an important thing, but I think we're grappling with bigger issues around how to handle spouses when the veteran themselves passes.
And to the Congresswoman's point, we are looking to really improve the survivor experience and the caregiver experience, whether those are spouses or other dependents like children that are taking care of their parents. And especially on the way up down here from Traverse City, I actually spoke with the director of the Office of Survivor Experience, Admiral Ann Duff, and we were talking about a lot of different new ways that we can outreach to that population, because many spouses and many dependents don't know that they're eligible for benefits when their veteran passes. So we want to get that information out there, and we want to leverage our relationships in Congress as well, because y'all have so many different channels along with our VSOs. We've served over 5,000 spouses and survivors since the Pact Act was signed and implemented, but we know there are many thousands more that are eligible for these benefits, and so we need your help to get that word out about the benefits that they're eligible for. Our partners at the Detroit VA Regional Office, I'll continue to point to them, and our partners from VHA and the Vet Center, because they can actually help get that information out and give you the right tools to relay it.
Thank you. Question 10. Since the Veterans Administration defines hypertension, high blood pressure, at over 160 over 100, while most medical associations, such as the CDC, the AMA, the Mayo Clinic, etc., have a threshold of 130 over 80. The question is, I am curious as to the number percent of claims received for high blood pressure that have actually received a disability award.
That is a great question that I can follow up on and get the specific percentage. I do know that hypertension is one of the 23 presumptive conditions for veterans that served in certain deployment locations. You can find out more about that on va.gov/PACT or call 1-800-MY-VA-411. But I would imagine it's a significant number. We'll know more, I think, when we do the year anniversary of the signing of the Pact Act. We'll have a pretty good picture of what that data looks like and what presumptive conditions have been applied for and awarded, and that'd be an interesting thing to report back on.
All right, question 11. What is the procedure with all the lawyers reaching out? Does that affect anything the VA can do?
I think that's probably related to a lot of the commercials that everyone's seeing on Camp Lejeune, and there's a lot of, so I would, first of all, you don't sign a contract with an attorney and after doing some research online, and you can always call us and ask for more information. There's a list of accredited claims agents and law firms and veteran service organizations that have been through the credentialing process to file claims with VA on behalf of veterans. That can be found online if you just Google accredited representative on va.gov. We have also some information. There are a lot of scam and fraud attempts that are trying to get veterans and their families to, the identity theft is a big one. There's some information back on the Detroit Regional Office table that talks specifically about how to avoid tips, do's and don'ts on how to avoid scams and fraud attempts. We just had a hearing on this in the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee on Consumer Protection. This is a big issue, and so we need your information. Please report it. I know that if you feel like you got duped, no big deal. There's no shame in that. We need to know about that if you've been a scam or fraud has been attempted to you, so that we can prevent that from happening to other veterans and other families. So please report it to us via the OIG hotline or the National Contact Center, which both of which we can provide in the back.
And just to put a Michigan slant on it, we have been, I'm sure people have seen both the TV ads about Lejeune and the digital ads on social media about Lejeune. They hit us hard with whatever paid program they had. It's not to say that any one of those ads is a scam, but we know that veterans, particularly older veterans, have been scammed on the Lejeune payout. It was like a big, honeypot. And it pulled a lot of people in. So again, do not sign any papers unless you know they're an accredited lawyer approved by the VA.
And just to add on to that, Congresswoman, since you reminded me about Camp Lejeune, you can go to va.gov/Camp Lejeune. We set up a website that has information about what she just mentioned, so you can learn more and then share that with veterans and other veterans and families in the community. We've also set up a task force called VSafe, so Veteran Scam and Fraud Evasion, at VA to work with our other federal partners at the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Department of Justice, and many others to prevent this from happening more and more.
Thank you. Question 12. How can I apply for exposure without taking me through the issues of if I have documented illness while serving?
I think this is maybe about someone's trauma and not wanting to re-experience their trauma of the time of their service. Maybe you can speak to how simple the intake process is, and that you don't have to go through the ins and outs of your personal service or something that happened to you during that time, and maybe just give people a quick, the things generally that they asked you.
Absolutely, and there's a couple of different ways. If you're already in VA care, you're going to go through the toxic exposure screening during your next primary care visit or your next specialty care visit. And once again, that's a very easy 5-10 minute question and answer with your provider that they'll ask about your exposures, your symptoms, and your locations, and they'll have your military history available. When you're filing a claim, which is critically important in order to access Pact Act benefits and care, you'll be able to not only connect your service, because our folks at the Veterans Benefits Administration will be able to access your military records and correlate your deployment locations to the symptoms that you have been screened for or that you identify in that compensation and pension examination. I think if veterans are feeling like it might be tough for them to go through this process, I would recommend going and speaking with the VA regional office here in Michigan and Detroit. Call 1-800-MY-VA-411 and speak to one of our specially trained representatives by pressing 9 and get to the VA hotline. They can help walk you through it and make you feel comfortable with this. Speak to our folks at the Vet Center as well if that is a triggering moment and you do re-experience that trauma, because there's such a great resource in the community.
And we have both a Lansing, Bach, and now a Howell location. So for folks around mid-Michigan, you can go to Detroit if you want to, but we also have places here, a brand new facility in Lansing and a brand new facility in Howell.
All right, question 13. What are your plans to reach homeless and rural area veterans about the benefits related to the Pact Act?
That is an excellent question, and I know that y'all, Congresswoman, y'all spent a tremendous amount of time reaching out to rural parts of your district and state, and that's a big issue because a lot of rural veterans don't have access to the internet in some cases or don't have smartphones, So we've been putting out a lot of radio public service announcements. There's actually a page on va.gov where you can download them and use them and share them with your local radio station so you can help us get the word out. We found that that's one of the best ways to reach the rural population, as well as sending post mail letters and text messages to your phone, whatever type of phone you may have. For the homeless population, there are homeless outreach teams that are with the Veterans Health Administration. So the Battle Creek VA Medical Center, the Ann Arbor VA Medical Center has specific outreach to the homeless population or the at-risk population. They have direct ties in with all of the shelters in the area. So my recommendation, if y'all do see and meet a homeless veteran or a veteran that's at risk of being homeless, please refer them to the medical centers or to 1-800-MY-VA-411 or va.gov/pact.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge, since we are in the Lansing area, like a lot of places around the country, we've seen an overall increase in homelessness, usually connected to mental health, but not always. And then in particular, veterans. We've seen an increase in veterans who are part of that homeless population, and that includes in the Lansing area, and even in our rural communities where some of you who are in VSOs have done a great job of helping a local veteran who needs a ride, helping a veteran with a hotel room, but not something that's sustainable over time. Look, no one can stand to see homeless veterans. It just sours the heart when you see that, and making sure that they get the right vouchers so they can get access to housing. A shelter is one thing, but our veterans here qualify for vouchers to get them into temporary housing, and the folks in the back can help connect you.
Question 15. Does the VA compensate a vet if exposed to Agent Orange, leading to hypertension, hypervigilance, or hypothyroidism?
I believe they're all related to the hypertension umbrella, and our friends in the back can definitely help answer that. But the answer is yes, if you can, if you deploy to those locations, have symptoms, and the Veterans Benefits Administration can correlate that across the board.
Next question. Does the VA have plans to align their threshold with others in the medical care community?
I'm not sure what threshold means, but if being the customer experience officer, if that means like benchmarking ourselves with the private sector care, then I think in many ways VA is just as good, if not better, than our private sector healthcare partners. Especially here in Michigan, some of the customer feedback scores that I've seen, but while studying them and being in Michigan the last 3 days, it's incredible. If we're talking about threshold in terms of capacity, there's a lot of veterans in this state, and there's a lot of demand on the VA medical centers for care, and that's why if they don't meet certain wait time or drive time standards, then you will be given the option to be referred to community care. And so we want to learn about that experience too. So we have surveys for both direct VA outpatient services care or inpatient services care or specialty care. Please give us that feedback and take your surveys and participate. And then on the community care side, if you are referred out, so I have my first community care appointment in 2 weeks because of capacity at the DC VA Medical Center. And there's a lot of great feedback mechanisms there, so we can continue to improve that experience.
I will say, and everyone in this room knows this, there is a perennial conversation about, do we privatize the VA? Do we say, okay, not everything's perfect, and so let's take it out of a government responsibility and let's make it a private sector responsibility? And I will just say personally, I don't believe, if you cannot get an appointment, then you deserve access to care, and you should go onto the community market, which sounds like you've been referred to do. But taking whole chunks of the VA and privatizing it, I do not support. I think it's a responsibility to cover folks when they come home from war. We need to desperately improve service if it's not getting to the veterans we need. But I don't think the answer is always to privatize, to privatize, to privatize. We've seen that movie, and it doesn't always end well, and certainly I'm not willing to risk it with veterans.
Thank you. All right, last question. Do we have any questions from?
No,
Well-
not from Zoom, but we'll probably, after you finish this, a couple of questions. Time for about 2 questions from our audience here. And then if you didn't get your question answered, I mean, there's a whole crew of people here that are happy to talk to you afterwards.
All right, thank you. All right, so last question. I am retired and have good medical insurance through my employer. I would like to keep my current medical insurance and reserve the VA benefit should I need it in the future. Is that a reasonable strategy?
Yes. I mean, this is one where, again, where I'm just going to say before August 9th, people, like, even if you have great care, it's all going great, you know, life is long and we never know what's going to happen, and you've earned this benefit, and particularly with toxic exposure, since that hits so many of our veterans in a very blanket way, just go in, take the time, put it in the bank. You just never know what happens, and you want it there in your back pocket should you need it.
And if you do, and I do think I agree with that, the strategy that's presented in the question, because especially if you have family members that are covered by your private sector health insurance, you definitely don't want to get rid of that because they're going to need to be covered as well. But I actually did this I experienced this myself. I used private health insurance because I had it through my employer up until 3 years ago. So the last 17 years of my life, I've been using private health insurance, and then the last 3, I've been using only VA. And I have to tell you, and I'm not just because I'm the chief experience officer, but because of my own experience going to VA, it's been better and more effective and more connected than I ever had it in the private health in my private health insurance experience. So,
Last question. I'm going to have the microphone open up the floor for questions.
Hello, okay, hi, if you have a question, yeah, I'll come on over to you. Like I said, time for a couple, and then we've got lots of resource folks. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Great. I served 15 years in the United States Navy Chaplain Corps. My question is twofold. I served at Camp Lejeune for 2 deployments as a reservist, and both of those times are a year before the gap to apply for the benefits. Is that going to change? I think it's like from 1980 something to 87, and I served in 88. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, can a deceased family member who died from Agent Orange, and I'm the only relative, I'm the only sister that's living. His daughter did not have a autopsy, and then she died. So the question is, can the last living relative of my brother make a claim?
I'd love to follow up with you after this, ma'am, and make sure that we get you the right answers and actually help you work through this. And also our partners at the Veterans Benefits Administration in the back can help answer those questions. On the Camp Lejeune, I would encourage you to file a claim, and that way we'll be able to connect your service and your symptoms to the dates of service. And even though they may not be in that time room, we'll have to figure that out. But thank you so much for your service as well. And the Navy Chaplain Corps, go Navy.
I'm going to head over here for our last question. Carlos, can you just raise your hand over there? So you said the mobile vet center outside has eligibility?
Yes. Anybody that wants to enroll in VA healthcare, we do have a representative in our mobile vet center truck outside. Awesome.
Great, go see the truck if you think you want to be eligible for VA healthcare. That could be easier, thank you. What else? Okay, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Jerome from East Lansing. It's kind of a 2-part question relating to John's last answer. First of all, thank you all for your service, and thank all of you caregivers and spouses for your support to the veteran. And a big shout out to Ingham County VA office. I hope all of you who use that have had the same positive experience as I have. Thanks to the leadership of Amy Pocan, who's really changed my life for the better. But it's relating to this, I think in Pact Act, gives the veteran an opportunity to acquire life insurance that was previously only available if you were recently discharged. So circling back through the private care insurance, I had Blue Cross and I was Medicare eligible. And right now I keep Medicare for me and my spouse. But with this life insurance, I was thinking I could keep her coverage, but if I canceled my Medicare, my Medicare premium would cover about half of my Pact life insurance. But I'm uncertain if the Pact life insurance is a guarantee or if you're medically ruled in or out because of your pre-existing conditions. And there might be other veterans here who are kind of wondering, you know, about this new opportunity for life insurance. I
That's a great
probably
question.
have a short window of time for me, and I don't know if that's cheating to acquire the life insurance. I'm not much of a cheater guy, but if it's available, I'd like to, you know, kind of know if I could get it. That would be a big benefit to my survivor.
Do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely, and so the best, because of what we just heard with the Veterans Health Administration enrollment folks can actually walk through your current Medicare benefits and what you may qualify for based on what priority group you fall under for VA care, for health insurance. For life insurance, there are some phenomenal products that are available to all types of veteran customers that our friends at the regional office can talk to you about, because VA Life is one of the new ones and it's really robust, so I'd very much welcome all of y'all to take a look at that. But please speak with our enrollment specialist, because they'll be able to help walk you through what you're qualified for, and then also file a claim if you're eligible for Pact and toxic exposure related benefits, so that may increase your ability to get served in a different priority group.
Any more questions?
I mean, I think we could probably keep going quite a bit.
Why don't we just take this, you can
Okay,
let this
go
woman
ahead.
right here in front
Okay.
conclude, since we didn't have a ton of ones from the audience.
Thank you all of the combat people who served. I served active duty, but I was not combat, and I was stationed in places like Fort Riley, Kansas, and Fort McClellan, Alabama. And according to a lot on the internet, that they had PFAS and other toxic exposures. As a matter of fact, Anniston, Alabama, and they paid out people. So will people like me or us?
Maybe Alexa, step away from her. I think maybe all the way away. Sorry, not to be rude, but you may need to leave the room.
Well, what's that coverage as it relates to others, some of the bases, even in Germany, Grafenberg, that had all of this toxic exposure? So that's
Great question, and I would encourage you to file a claim, get it on record, so that when we do investigate new locations and new exposures, we'll be able to communicate with the veteran community of where you may have served and been exposed to different toxins, because we know a lot of those exposures may have happened on U.S. soil at military installations similar to Camp Lejeune in the water, the toxic water. And once again, our partners in the back, they can help answer a lot of these questions. 1-800-MY-VA-411, but I would encourage you to file that claim, and that will help us contribute to the research based on your experience and what you were exposed to and what your symptoms are. That will help contribute to the research for future presumptive conditions.
And I just want to say, because the Michiganders in the room know that we care a lot about PFAS, and we look at our water a lot more seriously than a lot of states, given what we've gone through and given how important water is to our identity as a state. We have taken a kind of hard look at this for active duty military right now, because the military is still using PFAS-laden products. So I've done a ton of legislation to at least stop using so many of those products. Big companies like 3M will not use PFAS anymore, and we're still using PFAS in some pretty critical places. Testing of active duty, so it's just, I guess my point is, it's just a matter of time until we look at PFAS exposure for our veterans and whether that's something we want to add. So I couldn't emphasize enough putting in your claim. It may not work now, but that's how we got to this point on the Pact Act, is everyone put up their hands and said, I was exposed to this stuff and now weird things are happening. We need to keep doing that on all the toxic things that veterans were exposed to in a serious way, and keep adding to that list. And PFAS is it's on my target. Okay.
All right,
Well, we are at actually a couple minutes overtime. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and obviously thank Representative Slotkin and John Borsler for being here to answer some of your questions. As a reminder, all the resources, please take advantage of them. I don't hesitate to send my students to them, and I have so many positive experiences. But yeah, no, thank you all for coming.